Hi guys, and welcome to Quiet History Vault. Tonight we step quietly into a winter evening that feels almost ordinary, the kind of cold that nips at your nose but never quite convinces you to stay inside. You walk along a New York street in early March of 1888, boots tapping against hard ground, the faint crunch of old snow still tucked into gypsum corners where the sun hasn't reached all day. The city hums around you in a steady, familiar rhythm. Carriages rattle. Horses snort clouds of steam into the air. Somewhere nearby a door opens and closes with a dull wooden thud, and if you listen closely you can hear the faint echo of church bells drifting through the cold carried between buildings that feel sturdy, permanent, dependable. This is the city that believes it understands winter. You probably believe it too, which, gently speaking, is where things start to go wrong. Because you are standing at the edge of something that people will later struggle to describe properly. A storm so complete, so consuming, that even now as you rub your hands together for warmth, you probably wouldn't survive it if you stayed out too long. Not really. Not without luck. Not without help. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share where you are in the world right now, and what time it is where you're listening. There's something strangely comforting about knowing how far these quiet stories travel. Now dim the lights. You take another step forward, adjusting your coat as a thin breeze slides between the buildings. It feels sharper than before, though not enough to worry you. March in New York often carries surprises, small reminders that winter is not quite ready to let go. Still, nothing here feels extraordinary. A widely accepted historical detail tells us that March 11th began as a relatively typical late winter day in New York City, with temperatures hovering just above freezing and light precipitation expected. In other words, exactly the sort of day you would plan around without much concern. You might bring an extra scarf, you might complain about damp shoes, but you would not prepare for catastrophe. And so you continue your routine. You pass storefronts with fogged windows, their interiors glowing faintly in the dimming light. Inside, people linger, finishing meals, speaking in low voices, unaware of how quickly those ordinary conversations will soon feel distant, almost unreachable. The smell of roasted meat drifts briefly into the street before the door closes again, sealing warmth inside. You move past a row of narrow buildings, their upper windows flickering with lamplight. Somewhere above you, a curtain shifts and you catch a glimpse of someone peering down, perhaps judging the weather just as you are. It is a shared habit in this city. Everyone reads the sky, the wind, the subtle cues of change. Yet the sky gives you very little to work with. Clouds gather, but not dramatically. There's no towering wall of darkness, no cinematic warning, just a gradual thickening, softening the light as if the world is being gently dimmed. You might notice it, you might not. A small, curious tidbit often overlooked is that many people at the time described the early hours of the blizzard as deceptively mild, even slightly wet rather than snowy. Some accounts mention rain mixing with sleet, creating the impression that this would be more nuisance than a danger. It is a detail that feels almost unfair in hindsight, as if the storm were deliberately disguising itself. You pause at a corner, waiting as a carriage rolls past, its wheels cutting through slushy patches on the road. The driver hunches slightly, pulling his coat tighter. The horse moves steadily, though you notice its breath comes in heavier bursts now visible, even in the fading light. You glance upward again. There is a stillness forming, though it is difficult to define. The air feels heavier, as if it is holding something back. The breeze that brushes your face carries a sharper edge, one that lingers just a second longer than it should. You instinctively pull your collar up, not out of fear but habit. Historians still argue whether the true danger of the Great Blizzard of 1888 lay more in its sudden intensification or in the widespread complacency that preceded it. Was it the storm itself that proved so deadly, or the fact that almost no one believed it could become what it did? The answer, as you might suspect, sits somewhere in between. You begin to walk again, your pace unhurried. Around you, the city continues as it always does. Men in heavy coats move with purpose, their footsteps quick and confident. Women navigate the uneven ground, carefully lifting their skirts just enough to avoid the worst of the slush. Children dart between adults, their laughter cutting through the cold air in short, bright bursts. Nothing about this moment suggests that it will soon become one of the most dangerous days in the city's history. You pass a newsboy on the corner, his voice rising as he calls out the evening edition. The words blur together in the wind, but the tone is familiar. Urgent but not alarming. Just another night, another set of headlines, another reason to keep moving. You consider stopping, perhaps buying a paper, but decide against it. The cold encourages motion. Standing still feels like an invitation for discomfort. Instead, you continue down the street, boots pressing into the damp ground, leaving shallow impressions that quickly fill with water. The sound is soft, rhythmic, almost soothing, and yet there is that feeling again. A subtle shift. The first snowflake lands on your sleeve so lightly you almost miss it. Then another and another, each one small, delicate, barely worth noticing. They melt almost instantly, leaving behind tiny dark spots on the fabric. You pause watching as more begin to fall. It is at first almost beautiful. The flakes drift lazily, carried by a wind that has not yet decided what it wants to be. They move sideways, then downward, then sideways again, as if testing the air. Around you people react in small ways. A glance upward, a slight tightening of scarves, a quiet acknowledgement that the evening may be colder than expected. But no one rushes, no one runs, because this too feels familiar. Snow in March is not unusual. A brief flurry, a passing inconvenience, something to brush from your shoulders and forget by morning. You have seen it before, many times, and so you take another step and then another, moving deeper into a night that is only just beginning to change. The city does not yet know what is coming, and neither do you. You keep walking, brushing the light snow from your sleeve as if it were nothing more than a passing inconvenience. The flakes continue to fall a little thicker now, though still gentle enough that no one around you seems particularly concerned. Conversations carry on, doors open and close. Somewhere behind you a burst of laughter rises and fades into the cold air. The city is still convinced this is ordinary. You pass beneath a street lamp just as it flickers to life, its glow catching the drifting snow in a soft halo. For a moment it almost feels peaceful. The light turns each flake into something visible, something delicate, as if the sky itself were quietly shedding dust. You tilt your head slightly, watching. It is not heavy snow, not yet, but there is more of it now, and it no longer melts as quickly on your coat. Tiny crystals begin to hold their shape, clinging to fabric, collecting along seams. You brush them away again, though this time they resist just a little. A commonly accepted detail is that weather reports earlier that day did mention a storm moving up the coast, but forecasts in the late 19th century were far from precise. Without modern satellites or reliable long-range tracking, predictions were often vague, easily dismissed, and frequently wrong. So when people heard talk of rough weather, they treated it as background noise rather than a warning. You hear it now in passing. Two men stand near a doorway, speaking in low tones. One gestures vaguely towards the sky, his gloved hand cutting through the falling snow. You catch only fragments of the conversation. Something about a system moving north. Something about wind. The other man shrugs. You can almost hear the thought behind the gesture. It will pass. It always does. You continue on, your boots beginning to crunch more distinctly as the ground shifts from wet slush to a thin layer of accumulating snow. The sound is sharper now, more defined, echoing slightly between the buildings. It is a small change, but noticeable. You pull your coat tighter. The wind has picked up again, though only slightly. It moves in uneven pulses, brushing past you in short bursts, then falling away just as quickly. Each gust carries a sharper chill, one that lingers longer against your skin. A curious little detail recorded in some personal accounts is that people noticed the wind changing direction repeatedly in the early hours of the storm. It did not settle into a steady pattern at first. Instead, it shifted unpredictably, almost restlessly, as if the atmosphere itself was struggling to organize. You feel that uncertainty now. A gust catches you from the side, pushing lightly against your shoulder. A moment later, another comes from behind, colder, stronger. You adjust your stance without thinking, leaning slightly into it, then straightening again as it fades. Still you do not stop. Around you others continue as well. A woman hurries past, her head lowered, her steps quick but controlled. A man pulls his hat down further, his face tightening against the cold. The small adjustments of people who are used to weather, who believe they understand it. You pass another corner, and this time you do stop briefly. A horse stands there, hitched to a carriage, its ears flicking as the snow collects along its back. The animal shifts its weight, stamping one hoof against the ground. The driver sits above, wrapped in layers, his posture slightly hunched. He watches the street with a practiced patience. You wonder just for a second how long he will remain there. Then you move on. The snow is thicker now, no longer drifting lazily, but falling with a quiet persistence. The flakes are larger, heavier, and they no longer melt on contact. Instead, they settle. They gather along the edges of windowsills, along the tops of railings, along the narrow ledges of stone. The city begins to soften. Edges blur. Colours fade. The sharp lines of buildings lose their definition as a thin white layer spreads across every surface. It is subtle. At first, almost beautiful, like a painter slowly washing over the scene with a pale brush. And yet beneath that beauty, something else is forming. You notice it in the way people start to move just a little faster. Not panic, not even urgency. Just a quiet decision to reach home sooner rather than later. Conversations shorten. Doors close more quickly. The rhythm of the street shifts almost imperceptibly. Historians still debate whether the public response would have been different if clearer warnings had been issued that day. Would people have stayed indoors, cancelled plans, avoided travel? Or would the habits of routine and the need to work have pulled them out into the storm anyway? It is difficult to say, especially in a city that rarely stops for anything. You feel that pull yourself. There is always somewhere to go, something to finish, someone to meet. The idea of turning back, of retreating simply because of snow feels unnecessary, even slightly foolish. So you keep going. The wind rises again, stronger this time. It cuts across the street in a steady line, carrying snow with it in thin, fast-moving streams. The flakes no longer fall straight down. They move sideways, stinging lightly against your face. You blink, turning your head slightly to shield your eyes. The air feels colder now. Not dramatically so, but enough that you notice the difference. Your breath comes out in thicker clouds, each exhale hanging in the air for just a moment longer before being swept away. You pull your scarf higher. Around you, the sounds of the city begin to change. The steady clatter of wheels becomes muffled as snow builds along the roads. Footsteps lose their sharpness, replaced by a softer, more subdued crunch. Even voices seem quieter, as if the falling snow is absorbing them. It creates a strange kind of hush, not silence, but something close to it. Dampening of the world, a narrowing of focus. You find yourself more aware of your own movements, your own breathing, the steady rhythm of your steps. Another gust of wind pushes through stronger again, and this time it does not fade as quickly. It lingers. Snow swirls around you in tighter patterns, lifting from the ground as well as falling from above. For a moment it feels as though you are standing inside it rather than beneath it. The boundaries between sky and street begin to blur. You pause again, just briefly. Something about this feels different now. Not dangerous, not yet, but no longer entirely familiar. You glance down the street, and for the first time distance seems slightly harder to judge. The far end of the block looks softer, less defined, as if a thin veil has been drawn across it. You can still see, still move, still navigate. But it takes a little more effort. You take a breath, steadying yourself, and then step forward once more, because turning back still feels unnecessary. Because this is still just a storm, and storms, as you have always believed, come and go. You keep moving, though now your steps are just a little more deliberate, each foot placed with a touch more care than before. The snow gathers faster than you expected, settling into the seams of the street, smoothing over the uneven patches you knew were there just moments ago. It changes how the ground feels beneath you, softening it, disguising it. You notice it when your foot sinks slightly deeper than it should. Not much, just enough to make you pause. You look down, watching as your boot leaves a clearer imprint now, no longer filling instantly with water. The snow is beginning to hold. It clings to itself, building layer upon layer in quiet, steady accumulation. A widely accepted observation is that the early phase of the Great Blizzard of 1888 involved a rapid transition from wet precipitation to dense, dry snow, which allowed it to pile up far more quickly than people anticipated. That subtle shift is happening now, right beneath your feet, though it feels so gradual that it almost escapes your attention. You take another step. The wind presses against you again, firmer this time, no longer arriving in uncertain bursts, but beginning to settle into something more consistent. It slides along the street, finding the narrow spaces between buildings and rushing through them with a low, steady force. You turn your face slightly away from it instinctively. The flakes strike your cheek, now sharper, no longer dissolving on contact. They sting lightly, a persistent tapping that builds with each passing second. You pull your scarf higher, covering more of your face, leaving only your eyes exposed to the shifting white. Around you, the city is changing in small, quiet ways. A shopkeeper pulls his door closed more quickly than before, glancing out one last time as if reconsidering whether to remain open. A woman gathers her shawl tighter, her pace quickening just enough to suggest unease. A boy who'd been running now walks, his head lowered against the wind. Nothing dramatic, but noticeable. You move past another street lamp, its glow now blurred by the growing curtain of snow. The light no longer travels as far, diffused by the countless flakes drifting through it. Shadows soften, edges disappear, the world begins to shrink. You realize you can no longer see as clearly down the block as you could just minutes ago. It is subtle but undeniable. A peculiar detail preserved in some first-hand accounts is that people describe the snowfall as suddenly becoming thick as cloth, a phrase that sounds almost exaggerated until you experience something close to it. The air begins to feel occupied, filled, no longer empty space between you and everything else. You blink, brushing snow from your eyelashes. It accumulates faster than you expect, clinging to the fine hairs, melting just enough to blur your vision before freezing again in tiny crystals. You wipe them away with your glove, though the relief is brief. You continue forward, but now you are paying closer attention. The sound of your own breathing grows louder in your ears, partly because of the scarf pressed against your face, partly because the world around you is becoming quieter still. The usual noise of the city has softened to something distant, almost dreamlike. Carriages still pass, but less frequently. When they do, their wheels struggle more against the growing layer of snow, the sound deeper, heavier. Horses move with more effort now, their heads lowered, their steps slower, as if they too are beginning to question the path ahead. You glance towards one as it passes. Snow has begun to collect along its mane, forming a thin white line that contrasts against its darker coat. Its breath comes in thick, visible bursts, each one quickly torn apart by the wind. You wonder briefly how long it can keep going like this. Then the wind rises again. This time it does not simply push against you. It wraps around you, carrying snow in fast swirling currents that move both across and upward, lifting from the ground as much as falling from the sky. For a moment it feels disorienting, as though the direction of everything has shifted. You slow your pace. It is not fear exactly, more a growing awareness that the environment you trusted a short while ago is becoming less predictable. The street you knew, with its clear edges and familiar landmarks, now feels slightly altered, slightly less reliable. You pass a familiar corner, or at least you think you do. The sign is partially obscured, its lettering softened by the accumulating snow. The building looks the same, but also not quite the same. The details you relied on are fading one by one. Historians still argue whether many of the early casualties of the blizzard were the result of people becoming disoriented in conditions that seemed at first glance manageable. It is a difficult thing to accept the idea that a person could lose their sense of direction in a place they knew well, and yet as visibility narrows and the world reshapes itself around you, it becomes easier to understand. You take another step, then another. Your footprints trail behind you, but even as you glance back, you can see them beginning to fill in their edges, softening, their depth fading. The path you have just taken is already disappearing. There is something quietly unsettling about that. You turn forward again, focusing on what lies ahead. The snow continues to fall thicker, now more insistent. It no longer feels like a gentle descent, but a constant presence, a steady occupation of the space around you. The air itself seems to have weight. You pass a doorway where a man stands half inside, half outside, watching the street. His expression is harder to read now, his features blurred by the snow between you. He does not speak, does not call out. He simply watches. You wonder what he says. Perhaps the same thing you do. A city beginning to slip almost imperceptibly into something else. A faint unease settles in your chest. Not panic, not yet, but the quiet realization that this is no longer just another evening, no longer just another storm. The rules you rely on, the assumptions you carry without thinking, are beginning to shift. You pull your coat tighter once more. The cold presses in more persistent now, finding its way through layers, settling against your skin in a way that feels less temporary. Your fingers, even inside your gloves, begin to stiffen slightly. You flex them, trying to keep the warmth moving. You keep walking, because stopping still feels wrong, because moving feels like control. But the city around you is changing faster now, and you can feel it in every step, every breath, every glance into the narrowing white. And though you do not yet say it aloud, a small quiet thought begins to form. This storm is not what you expected. You press forward though now, each step requires a bit more intention, a bit more awareness of where your foot will land. The snow has thickened into something persistent, something that no longer feels temporary or decorative. It builds steadily, quietly, reshaping the street beneath you. The wind rises again, and this time it does not feel like a passing gust. It stays. It pushes against your chest with a steady force, tugging at your coat, slipping through every small opening in your clothing as if it knows exactly where to find you. You lean into it instinctively, adjusting your balance, but even that small act feels more deliberate than it should. You lower your head. The snow no longer drifts down in gentle flakes. It moves fast now, driven sideways, cutting across your field of vision in thick, rushing lines. When you look ahead, the street appears shortened, compressed as if distance itself has been folded inward. You try to focus it on a point farther down, but it fades quickly into a pale blur. A well-established historical detail notes that the Great Blizzard of 1888 produced wind speeds strong enough to create whiteout conditions across much of New York City. In these moments, visibility dropped so drastically that even familiar streets became difficult to navigate. You're beginning to understand what that means, not as a fact, but as a feeling. You take another step and your boot sinks deeper this time. Not dangerously deep, but enough to slow you enough to make you lift your leg higher than before just to move forward. The rhythm of walking changes. What was once automatic now requires effort. Around you others are reacting. A man ahead of you stops, briefly turning his back to the wind as he adjusts his coat. Another struggles to keep his hat in place, one hand gripping it tightly as the gusts try to tear it away. A woman moves quickly toward a doorway, her figure vanishing almost immediately into the dim interior. The street is thinning, not empty but less certain. People are no longer lingering. Movements are sharper, more purposeful, though still without panic. It is the behavior of a city beginning to recognize discomfort, but not yet danger. You continue, though. Your pace has slowed. The wind intensifies again, and now it carries sound with it, a low, continuous howl that threads between the buildings. It is not loud in the way of a sudden noise, but constant, filling the spaces where other sounds used to live. You notice how much quieter everything else has become. The clatter of wheels is nearly gone. Voices are rare, and when they do appear, they are quickly swallowed by the wind. Even your own footsteps seem muted, absorbed into the growing layers of snow. It creates a strange sense of isolation. You are not alone, not truly, but the connection to others feels thinner, stretched across a space that is no longer stable. You glance to your side, expecting to see the familiar outline of buildings, but they are softened now, their edges blurred, their details fading into the white. A curious anecdote from the time mentions that some people describe the storm as making the city feel hollow, as though the usual presence of others had been pushed just out of reach. It is an oddly accurate way to describe what you feel now, standing in a place that should be crowded, yet feels distant. You push forward again. The snow strikes your face harder, now sharp and persistent. It stings your skin, finding the small exposed areas around your eyes, your cheeks, the bridge of your nose. You squint, narrowing your vision to a smaller, more manageable frame. You begin to rely less on sight. Instead, you focus on memory. You know this street. You know where it bends slightly, where the curb rises, where the next corner should be. You move toward those remember points, trusting that they still exist beneath the shifting layers of snow. But even memory feels less certain here. The wind shifts direction again, though now it does so with force, pushing from one side then another, creating swirling patterns that lift snow from the ground and throw it back into the air. It no longer matters where the flakes come from. They are everywhere. You pause just for a moment. The air around you feels thick, almost crowded. Breathing takes a little more effort, not because there is less air, but because it feels colder, sharper, as if each inhale must be considered. You pull your scarf tighter again, covering as much of your face as possible. Some researchers have long discussed whether the sudden intensification of the storm was influenced by a collision of warm coastal air and a rapidly descending cold front, creating the violent conditions that took so many by surprise. It is a complex explanation, one that belongs to charts and maps and careful analysis. But here in this moment it feels simpler. The world has turned against you. You take another step and your foot slides slightly before finding purchase. The ground beneath the snow is becoming uneven, unpredictable. You are just catching your balance, but the movement sends a small jolt through your body. You are beginning to feel it now. Not fear, not fully, but a growing awareness that this is no longer something you can ignore. The storm is not passing. It is building layer upon layer, minute by minute. Ahead you think you see a figure. It is difficult to tell at first, just a darker shape moving through the white. As you draw closer, the outline becomes clearer. A man hunched forward, his steps slow and deliberate, as if each one costs him something. You pass him without speaking. There is no exchange, no nod, no shared acknowledgement. Just two people moving through the same storm, each focused on their own path, their own survival. You glance back once, but the figure is already fading, swallowed by the snow. The city you knew only a short time ago feels distant now, replaced by something quieter, harsher, more uncertain. The familiar landmarks are still there, but they no longer guide you in the same way. They're obscured, softened, unreliable. You continue forward, though. The idea of stopping has begun to change. Earlier it felt unnecessary. Now it feels dangerous. You keep moving because movement means warmth, because stopping means letting the cold settle in, letting the wind take more from you than you can afford to lose. You do not think about it in words, not yet, but your body understands. The storm is no longer something happening around you. It is something you are inside of, and as the wind howls louder as the snow thickens further, you begin to realize that the streets you trusted have become something else entirely. Not pathways, but traps. You keep moving because the moment you slow too much, the cold begins to settle into you in a way that feels deeper than before. It is no longer just on your skin. It presses inward, quiet and steady, as if it has time to wait you out. The street ahead has almost disappeared now. Not entirely, but enough that you cannot trace its full length anymore. Shapes dissolve into pale distance. Corners appear later than expected. The space between you and everything else feels uncertain, stretched thin by the storm. You try to orient yourself. You know where you are, or at least you think you do. That building to your left should mark the halfway point to the next avenue. The street should open up soon. The angle of the road should shift slightly. These are things you have walked past countless times. But now each step tests that certainty. A well-documented fact is that during the Great Blizzard of 1888, many commuters and pedestrians became disoriented even within neighborhoods they knew intimately. Landmarks vanished behind drifting snow, and the usual visual cues that guided movement were erased in a matter of hours. You are experiencing that erasure in real time. You squint forward, trying to make sense of what lies ahead. The wind surges again, stronger than before, forcing you to lean into it. It pushes against your chest and shoulders, slowing your progress, turning each step into a small effort of resistance. Snow sweeps past your legs in fast, low currents, building uneven ridges across the ground. You step into one of those ridges without seeing it. Your foot sinks suddenly deeper than expected, and you stumble slightly before catching yourself. The motion is quick, but it sends a brief flash of tension through your body. You steady yourself, breathing a little harder now. The ground cannot be trusted anymore. You adjust your stride, lifting your feet higher, placing them more carefully. It slows you down, but it keeps you upright. Around you, others are doing the same, though fewer remain visible with each passing moment. You begin to notice something else. The space between people is growing, not because everyone has vanished, but because visibility has narrowed so much that each person seems isolated within their own smaller pocket of the storm. You see someone only when they are close, then they fade again, swallowed by the moving white. It creates a strange kind of loneliness. A lesser-known detail from personal diaries of the time describes how individuals often felt as though they were the only person left on the street, even when others were nearby. The storm did not just obscure sight, it separated people from one another in subtle, disorienting ways. You feel that separation now. You pass what you believe is the next intersection, though it is difficult to be sure. The usual markers are hidden. The street signs are coated in snow. The buildings blend together, their distinct features softened into uniform shapes. You hesitate for a moment. Should you turn here? You search your memory, trying to recall the exact placement of doors, windows, the slight curve of the road. But the storm has altered everything just enough that those details no longer align perfectly with what you see. Scholars continue to debate whether the greatest danger during the blizzard came from exposure itself or from the confusion it caused. Many who perished were not far from safety, yet they lost their way in conditions that distorted both distance and direction. It is a quiet, unsettling possibility. You choose to keep going straight. It feels safer than guessing. The wind howls louder now, threading through the narrow spaces between buildings with a force that seems almost deliberate. It catches your coat, pulling at it, tugging you slightly off balance. You tighten your grip on yourself, shoulders hunched, head lowered. Snow gathers along your boots, clinging to the fabric, adding weight with every step. You feel it as a slow drag, a subtle resistance that builds over time. You kick lightly to clear it, but it returns almost immediately. Your breathing grows heavier, not from exhaustion yet, but from effort. Each inhale feels sharper, colder, as if the air itself has teeth. You pull your scarf tighter again, though it offers only partial relief. Ahead you see movement. A figure emerges from the storm walking toward you. At first, it is just a shape, a darker patch against the white. Then it resolves into a man, his posture bent forward, one hand shielding his face, the other held slightly out as if feeling his way through the air. You approach each other slowly. As you pass, there is a brief moment where your shoulders nearly touch. You catch a glimpse of his face, partially obscured, eyes narrowed, expression tense. He does not speak. Neither do you. There is no time for the conversation here, only movement. You continue on, though. The encounter leaves something behind. A quiet acknowledgement that you are not alone, and yet you are entirely responsible for your own path. The storm does not care about your destination. It does not guide you. It only surrounds you. You step forward again and again, counting your movements without realizing it. One step, then another, then another. The rhythm becomes something you hold on to, a way to maintain control in a space that offers very little of it. But even that rhythm is challenged. The ground shifts beneath you, uneven, unpredictable. Snowdrifts rise in unexpected places, forcing you to adjust a step around to climb slightly before descending again. It is no longer a flat path. It is terrain. You feel the difference in your legs now, a growing heaviness, a subtle fatigue that was not there before. You push through it, reminding yourself that stopping is not an option. Not here. Not now. You glance upward, though it tells you nothing. The sky is gone, replaced by a constant swirling mass of white that blends seamlessly with the world below. There is no horizon, no clear boundary between above and ahead. Just movement. Just snow. And as you take another step into it, you begin to understand something with quiet clarity. This is no longer a storm you're passing through. It is something you must endure. You push forward though. Now each step feels like a small negotiation between your will and the storm pressing against you. The wind has settled into something relentless, no longer rising and falling in bursts, but maintaining a steady punishing force that leans into your body from one side, then shifts just enough to unsettle you again. You angle your shoulders trying to move with it instead of against it. It helps slightly, but not enough. The street beneath you has become uneven in a way that feels almost deliberate, as if the snow is shaping itself into obstacles. Drifts form in ridges, and pockets forcing you to lift your legs higher to test each step before committing your weight. What was once a simple walk has become something closer to effortful climbing. You pass what you think is a storefront, though it is difficult to be certain. The windows are obscured, their glass coated in frost and snow, their interiors hidden behind a dull, pale layer. You can no longer tell if anyone is inside. The city feels closed. A widely accepted historical observation tells us that by midday on March 12th, elevated railways in New York began to fail under the weight of snow and ice, stranding passengers in stalled trains above the streets. These structures, once symbols of movement and progress, quickly became traps of their own. You hear it before you see it, a dull metallic groan carried faintly through the wind. You stop for a moment, turning your head slightly, trying to locate the source. The sound comes again, deeper this time, followed by a faint clatter that seems to echo somewhere above you. You glance upward, the view is limited. Through the shifting white, you can just make out the dark outline of the elevated tracks. A train sits there motionless, its shape barely visible through the storm. For a moment, it looks unreal, like something suspended between worlds. You imagine the people inside, pressed close together. Windows fogged from breath, waiting for movement that does not come. A small, oddly human detail recorded in some accounts describes how stranded passengers attempted to pass time by talking, sharing food, even singing softly to calm one another. It is a strangely gentle image set against the violence of the storm, a reminder that even in crisis people reach for normalcy. Another gust of wind cuts across your face, snapping your attention back to the present. You cannot stay still. You resume walking, though. And now the idea of shelter presses more firmly into your thoughts, not just comfort, but necessity. The cold is deeper now, more insistent. It seeps through layers, settling into your hands, your feet, your chest. You flex your fingers again, but they respond more slowly. The storm tightens around you. Snow swirls upward from the ground, lifted by the wind joining the constant fall from above. It surrounds you completely, filling every space, erasing the boundaries that once defined the street. You are no longer walking through a city. You are moving through something else. You pass another figure, though this one is barely visible until you are almost upon them. A woman stands near a doorway, her hand pressed against the wall as if steadying herself. Her posture is rigid, her movements minimal. You hesitate just for a second. Should you stop? Should you speak? But the wind howls louder, pushing against you, urging you forward. The thought of standing still, of exposing yourself longer than necessary, pulls you away from hesitation. You move on. It is not indifference. It is survival. Some researchers have examined whether the failure of transportation during the blizzard amplified its human cost more than the weather itself. With trains stalled and streets impassable, people were left without options, forced to remain where they were, or struggle blindly through conditions that worsened by the minute. You feel that limitation now. There is no easy way out of this, no quick route to safety, only distance obscured and uncertain. The wind shifts again, stronger now, striking you from the front. It forces you to lean sharply, your body angled just to maintain balance. Snow lashes against your face sharper than before, each particle like a tiny impact. You close your eyes briefly just to reset. When you open them again, the world feels even narrower. Visibility has dropped further. You can barely see beyond a few steps now. Shapes appear suddenly, then vanish just as quickly. The city has become a series of fleeting impressions rather than a continuous space. You rely on instinct, on memory, on the simple act of placing one foot in front of the other. Your breathing grows heavier again, not just from effort, but from the cold pressing into your lungs. Each inhale feels sharper, more deliberate. bear it, as if your body must work to accept it. You adjust your scarf once more, though it is damp now, its fabric stiffening slightly in the cold. You keep moving, because stopping still feels dangerous, because the idea of standing still in this feels like surrender. You pass beneath the elevated tracks, their dark structure looming faintly above you. Snow clings to the metal beams, forming uneven shapes that shift and fall in small sudden releases. You hear one of them drop nearby, a soft thud, followed by a scatter of powder. You flinch instinctively, then continue. The ground beneath the tracks is slightly more sheltered, though not enough to offer real relief. The wind still finds its way through, curling around the structure, creating unpredictable currents that push and pull at you. You emerge from beneath it, and the full force of the storm returns immediately. Stronger, colder, more certain. You take another step, then another, though. Now each one feels heavier, slower, as if the storm itself is beginning to weigh on you. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a realization settles quietly into place. This is not a moment, not a passing Vogel. This is something that will last, something that will hold the city in its grip far longer than anyone expected. You tighten your coat, lower your head, and keep going, because there is nothing else to do. You keep moving, though. Now, each step carries a weight that feels both physical and quietly emotional. The storm has settled into its full presence, no longer building, no longer surprising. Simply it exists around you, constant and unyielding. The wind presses against your side, steady as a hand that refuses to let go. Snow continues to fall and rise at the same time, and are drifting down from above while being swept upward from the ground until it feels as though you are walking inside a moving cloud. The air is filled, crowded, leaving no clear space untouched. You lift your foot and it sinks deeper than before. This time you pause. The drift is higher here, shaped by the wind into a soft ridge that reaches above your ankle. You pull your foot free, but not without effort. The motion is slower, heavier, and it leaves behind a hollow that begins to fill almost immediately. You try again. Each step now feels like work. A widely recognized historical detail is that snowdrifts during the Great Blizzard of 1888 reached heights of several feet in many areas, especially where the wind piled them against buildings and along streets. In some places they rose high enough to block doors and windows entirely. You're beginning to encounter the early stages of those formations. You move forward, adjusting your path slightly to avoid the deeper ridges, though even the shallower ground demands more from you than before. Your legs begin to feel the strain at a slow burn building with each lift and push. Ahead, a shape emerges. At first, it looks like part of the street, a darker mass against the white, but as you draw closer, it resolves into something more familiar. A carriage. It stands at an angle, partially buried already, its wheels half hidden beneath the accumulating snow. The driver's seat is empty, the reins hanging loosely, stiffening as they freeze. And beside it, the horse. It stands motionless. You slow as you approach, your breath catching slightly, though you are not entirely sure why. The animal's head is lowered, its body coated in a thin layer of snow that continues to build even as you watch. Its ears do not flick. Its sides do not rise. It has stopped. A sobering fact recorded in many accounts is that thousands of horses perished during the blizzard, unable to withstand the combined effects of cold exhaustion and immobility. These animals were essential to the city's daily life, powering transportation, deliveries, and labour. Their loss was not just tragic, but deeply disruptive. You stand for a moment, just a moment, looking at the still form. There is something quietly heavy about it. The realization that even the strongest, most accustomed creatures can be overcome in conditions like this, that endurance has limits, even when those limits are not immediately visible. You pull your gaze away. The wind does not pause for reflection. It pushes against you again, stronger, now urging you forward, reminding you that standing still is not a luxury you can afford. You step past the carriage, your boots brushing against the edge of the drift that has already begun to claim it. You do not look back. A small unusual detail mentioned in some recollections is that the streets after the storm were described as eerily quiet, not just because of the absence of people, but because of the absence of horses. The usual rhythm of hooves and wheels vanished, leaving behind a silence that felt unnatural to those who lived through it. You're beginning to hear that song The familiar sounds are fading, replaced by the constant rush of wind and the soft, relentless hiss of snow moving across itself. It is a sound that fills everything, leaving little room for anything else. You continue forward, though, your pace has slowed further. Your legs feel heavier now, each movement requiring more effort than the last. The snow resists you, pulling at your boots, forcing you to lift higher, step harder. It is not just the cold you're fighting, it is the ground itself. Oh, Jesus. You pass another shape, then another. Some are objects. A cart half buried, a pile of crates pushed against a wall. Others are harder to identify at first, their outlines softened by the snow, until you are close enough to understand what you're seeing. A man leaning against a doorway, his posture slumped, his movements minimal. You hesitate again. He shifts slightly, just enough to confirm that he is still there, still aware. His head turns a fraction, though you cannot see his face clearly. There is no exchange of words, only presence. You nod almost without thinking, then continue. There is an unspoken understanding now. Everyone is moving through their own struggle, their own small battle against the storm. There is no energy left for anything beyond that. Some historians continue to debate whether more lives might have been saved if people had stayed together, rather than moving individually through the storm. It is a difficult question shaped by hindsight. In the moment, the instinct to keep moving to reach shelter often overrides the idea of collective safety. You feel that instinct clearly. It drives you forward step by step, even as the effort increases, even as the conditions worsen. Stopping feels like risk. Slowing feels like surrender. The wind rises again, and this time it carries a deeper chill, one that seems to slip beneath your clothing, settling against your skin with a quiet persistence. You shiver, though the motion feels slower, less effective. Your fingers respond more sluggishly now. You flex them again, trying to maintain warmth, but the sensation is dulled. You are aware of your hands, but they feel distant, as if they belong to someone else. You pull your coat tighter, though the fabric is stiffening, slightly damp from the snow that continues to cling and freeze. You keep moving, because movement is all you have, because the storm does not offer alternatives. You take another step, then another, your path uncertain, but your direction fixed by instinct rather than clarity. The city around you has faded into shapes and shadows, its details erased by the constant motion of snow. And as you push forward through it, you begin to understand something more fully than before. This storm does not just slow the city, it stops it, one piece at a time. You keep moving, though. Now the thought of being indoors begins to take on a different weight in your mind. It is no longer just about comfort. It is about distance from the wind, from the snow that presses in from every direction, from the cold that has begun to settle deeper into your body. You glance toward the nearest building, its doorway half obscured by drifting snow. For a moment you consider it, stepping inside, closing the door, letting the storm remain outside even if only briefly. But something holds you back. Perhaps it is uncertainty about who waits on the other side. Perhaps it is the instinct to keep going, to reach a place that feels more certain and more your own. So you continue. The wind slides along the street again, carrying snow that curls around your legs, gathering in soft waves that rise and fall with each gust. It reshapes the ground, continuously erasing any sense of stability. Your boots press down, then sink, then lift again with effort. The rhythm is slower now, more deliberate. You pass another doorway, this one slightly open. A thin line of warmer air escapes into the storm, carrying with it the faint scent of something cooked, something familiar. It reaches you for just a moment before the wind tears it away. Inside you hear voices, low, steady, contained. You pause just outside enough to sense the difference between the storm and the shelter within. The air near the doorway feels softer, less biting. The sound of the wind is muted, pushed back by walls and structure. A well-known historical detail tells us that during the blizzard, many New Yorkers remained indoors for days, sealing windows with cloth or paper, rationing coal and relying on whatever supplies they had at hand. Homes became small worlds, isolated but vital. You imagine that scene, and now people gathered close, lamps burning steadily, windows frosted over from the inside as warmth meets cold. The quiet tension of waiting, of listening to the storm without knowing how long it will last. A lesser-known detail from household accounts describes how some families used furniture, even mattresses, to block drafts from doors and windows, creating makeshift barriers against the cold air. It is a small act of adaptation, but one that speaks to how quickly ordinary spaces had to be transformed into defences. You step away from the doorway. The warmth is tempting, but it is not yours. You move on. The street ahead is even less defined now. Snow has gathered along the sides of buildings, forming uneven walls that narrow the path. The open space you once walked through has begun to close in, shaped by the constant pressure of wind and accumulation. You adjust your direction slightly, following what seems like the clearest route. It is not a path in the usual sense, more a suggestion of one. You pass another building, its windows dark, its door shut tight. Snow has piled against it in thick layers, reaching halfway up the frame. You imagine the effort it would take to open that door now, to push against the weight pressing from the outside. Inside, if anyone is there, they are likely staying exactly where they are. Researchers have long discussed whether the design of 19th century buildings helped or hindered survival during extreme storms like this one. Thick walls and small windows could retain heat effectively, but limited ventilation and reliance on coal fires also created risks if supplies ran low or airflow became restricted. You think about that as you walk. Shelter is not simple. It protects, but it also confines. Fines. You pull your coat tighter again, though. The motion feels slower, less precise. Your hands are not responding as quickly as they once did. The cold has settled into them, dulling sensation, reducing movement. You flex your fingers again, but the feeling is distant. You keep moving, because outside at least you can still act. The wind rises once more, and this time it carries a deeper, more penetrating chill. It slips through the smallest gaps, finding your neck, your wrists, the edges of your clothing. You shiver, though the motion feels muted, if your body is conserving energy rather than reacting fully. Ahead you see a faint glow, a window partially visible through the snow. You move toward it, drawn not just by the light but by what it represents. Stability, warmth, life continuing despite the storm. As you approach, you can make out movement inside. Figures gathered close, someone tending to a small fire, another seated still, perhaps listening, perhaps simply waiting. The scene is quiet, contained, removed from the chaos outside. You stand there for a moment, watching. There is something deeply calming about it. A reminder that even as the storm reshapes the world beyond those walls, there are places where it cannot reach entirely, where people adapt, endure, and find small ways to remain steady. Some scholars still question how different groups within the city experienced the storm, noting that access to fuel, food, and secure housing varied widely. For some, these interiors were places of relative safety. For others, they were fragile shelters that offered only partial protection. You step back from the window. The wind immediately reclaims the space around you, filling the air with motion and sound once more. The contrast is sharp, almost jarring. You turn forward again. The street continues, though it feels less like a route and more like a challenge now. Each step must be chosen, each movement considered. The storm has not eased. It has settled into itself, fully formed, fully present, and you are still inside it. You move on, carrying with you the imagery of those small warm rooms, those quiet pockets of resistance against the cold. They linger in your mind not as escape but as possibility, a reminder that somewhere ahead there may be a door that opens for you, if you can reach it. You keep moving, though now the idea of shelter no longer feels optional. It presses into your thoughts with a quiet insistence, growing stronger with every step. The storm has settled into a rhythm that shows no sign of easing, and your body is beginning to respond in ways you cannot ignore. The cold is deeper now. Not sharp, not sudden, but steady. It seeps through layers, settling into your arms, your legs, your chest. You feel it most in your hands and feet, where sensation has dulled into something distant and slow. You flex your fingers again. They respond, but only just. Ahead, the street opens slightly, or at least you think it does. The buildings seem to pull back a little, creating a wider space where the wind has more room to move. It sweeps across this area with greater force, lifting snow into thick shifting clouds that obscure everything beyond a few steps. You hesitate at the edge of it, then you step forward. The wind hits you immediately stronger than before, pushing against your body with a force that makes you lean into it instinctively. Snow lashes across your face, stinging persistent, leaving tiny trails of cold where it strikes. You lower your head and push through. A well-established detail from the time tells us that many of New York's hotels and boarding houses quickly filled with stranded individuals during the blizzard, becoming temporary refugees for those unable to reach their homes. These places, designed for short stays and passing guests, transformed into crowded shelters almost overnight. You begin to see signs of that now. Through the shifting white, a larger building emerges, its entrance marked by a faint glow of light that spills out into the storm. The doorway is partially cleared, a narrow path cut through the accumulating snow. You move toward it. As you approach, you hear voices, not the muffled, distant sounds you have grown used to, but clearer, more immediate. Conversation layered over conversation, low but constant, the sound of people gathered together. You reach the entrance and pause. The door opens briefly as someone steps out, and for a moment the warmth inside spills into the cold air around you. It carries with it the scent of food, of damp wool drying near a fire, of something human and alive. You catch a glimpse inside. The room is crowded. People sit close together, coats still on faces flushed from the heat. Some speak in quiet tones, others simply sit, their expressions tired but steady. A few stand near the walls as if unsure where to place themselves. The door closes again, sealing the warmth inside. You remain where you are for a moment. The contrast is almost overwhelming. Outside, the storm presses in, relentless and cold. Inside, there is light heat, the steady presence of others. It feels like stepping between two entirely different worlds, separated by a single door. A lesser-known detail from accounts of the blizzard notes that some hotels charged little or nothing to those stranded, while others raised prices sharply due to demand. It created a strange mix of generosity and opportunism, revealing different sides of human nature under pressure. You consider entering. The thought is immediate, almost instinctive. To step inside, to close the door behind you, to let the storm remain outside, even if only for a while. But then another thought follows. How long can you stay? How many others need that space? You hesitate. The wind pushes against your back again, stronger now, as if answering the question for you. It presses you forward, urging you to decide. You step aside from the doorway instead, not because you do not need it, but because something in you still believes you can reach your own place, your own shelter, somewhere more certain. You turn away and continue. The street beyond the building feels darker now, the light from the entrance fading quickly behind you. The storm closes in again, filling the space, erasing the brief sense of relief. You move forward, though. Your pace has slowed further. Your legs feel heavier each step, requiring more effort. The snow resists you, clinging, pulling, forcing you to lift higher, push harder. It is no longer just walking. It is work. A curious detail mentioned in some recollections is that people began to measure distance during the storm, not in blocks or streets, but in effort. A short distance could feel endless, while a familiar route could become unrecognizable. It changed how people understood space itself. You feel that change now. The distance ahead seems uncertain, shifting with each step. What should be close feels far. What should be simple feels complex. The storm has altered not just the environment, but your perception of it. You pass another figure, though this one moves quickly toward the building you just left. Their steps are hurried, their posture leaning forward with purpose. You watch as they reach the door, push it open, and disappear inside. You do not follow. Instead, you keep moving. The wind rises again, carrying with it a deeper chill that settles into your chest. Your breathing becomes more deliberate, each inhale sharper, each exhale slower. You focus on it without thinking, maintaining a rhythm that feels increasingly important. You pull your scarf higher, though it is stiff now, its fabric hardened by the cold. You keep going, because stopping still feels wrong, because turning back feels uncertain, because forward, even without clarity, still feels like the only direction left. The storm continues around you, unchanging, unrelenting. It does not weaken. It does not pause. It simply holds its place, pressing into the city, into you minute by minute. And as you take another step into it, the warmth of that crowded room lingers in your mind, not as regret, but as a reminder of what you're trying to reach. You move on though now. Every step feels heavier, as if the storm has settled not only around you but inside you as well. The cold has deepened into something steady and quiet, no longer sharp or shocking but persistent, almost patient. Your breath comes slower. You notice it in the way your chest rises, the way each inhale feels measured, as if your body is conserving energy without asking your permission. You pull your scarf closer, though the fabric is stiff and cold against your face. The street narrows again, though it is difficult to tell if it truly does or if the snow has simply shaped it that way. Drifts rise along the edges, pressing inward, creating uneven walls that guide your movement whether you want them to or not. You follow the narrowest opening. It feels safer. A broadly accepted fact is that poorer neighborhoods in New York suffered more severely during the blizzard as overcrowded tenements, limited heating, and scarce supplies made survival far more difficult. The storm did not fall equally on everyone. It revealed the fragile edges of daily life for those already living close to them. You begin to see that difference now. The buildings here feel closer, their walls worn, their windows smaller and dimmer. Snow has piled against them in thicker layers, blocking lower entrances almost entirely. Some doors are invisible beneath the drifts, their outlines lost beneath the weight. You pass one such doorway. Only the top half remains visible, the rest buried. A faint light glows behind the frosted glass, flickering softly. Inside, you imagine a small room, crowded, warm in places, cold in others. People gathered close not just for comfort but for necessity. A small unexpected detail noted in some accounts is that in tightly packed tenements, families often shared heat between rooms by leaving doors open, creating uneven pockets of warmth that shifted as the fire burned down. It was not efficient, but it was what they had. You pause briefly near one window. Through the frost, you can just make out movement inside. A figure leaning forward, perhaps tending to a stove. Another seated close by, wrapped in layers, still and quiet. The air inside looks thicker, warmer, though you know it may not feel that way to those within. You step back. The contrast is less comforting here. Inside offers shelter, but also confinement. Limited space, limited resources. The storm presses against those walls just as it presses against you. Some scholars continue to explore how social inequality shaped survival rates during the blizzard, suggesting that access to fuel, food, and structural protection played a decisive role in who endured and who did not. It is a complex picture, one that becomes clearer when you see these places up close. You move on. The snow deepens again, forcing you to lift your legs higher with each step. The motion is slower now, more deliberate, your body adjusting to the resistance without fully overcoming it. Your boots press down, sink, then rise again with effort. You feel it in your thighs, in the steady burn that builds with each movement. You pass another figure, this one seated against a wall, partially shielded from the wind. Their posture is still, their head lowered. For a moment, you cannot tell if they are resting or simply conserving energy. You slow. There is a quiet instinct to stop, to check, to say something, but the wind pushes against you again, firm and insistent. The cold presses deeper, reminding you that standing still carries its own risk. You move on. It is not a choice made lightly. It is one shaped by the storm itself. A lesser-known observation from diaries of the time describes how people began to prioritize movement over everything else, even over interaction. The act of continuing forward became the most important thing, sometimes at the expense of connection. You feel that truth now. The storm reduces everything to its simplest form. Move, or stop, and stopping feels dangerous. You keep going, though. Your pace has slowed to something almost steady and heavy, each step placed with care, each movement measured. The city around you has faded further, its details reduced to shapes and shadows that appear and disappear in the shifting snow. You rely less on sight now, more on instinct, on the faint sense of direction that remains even as the world around you becomes less certain. The wind rises again, carrying with it a deeper chill that settles into your chest. You feel it in your breathing and the way each inhale seems to reach further colder before warming again inside you. You adjust your calf once more, though the motion feels slower, less precise. Your hands are not what they were. You flex them again, but the sensation is faint. You keep moving, because movement still means warmth, however small, because the alternative is something you do not want to consider. You pass another row of buildings, their windows dark, their doors sealed. Snow has gathered thickly along their sides, shaping the street into a narrow corridor that guides you forward whether you want it to or not. You follow it. There is no other option. And as you take another step into the narrowing path, you begin to understand something more clearly than before. This storm does not just challenge the city, it reveals it. Every weakness, every strength, every quiet difference that existed long before the first snow fell. And now in this deepening cold, you carry those realizations with you as you continue forward one step at a time. You continue forward though. Now your movement feels slower, heavier, as if each step must pass through a quiet resistance before it becomes real. The storm has settled into something constant, something that no longer surprises you, only wears you down piece by piece. The wind presses steadily against your side. Snow moves in long, continuous streams, sliding across the ground, lifting, falling, reshaping everything it touches. The city is no longer a fixed place, it shifts with each gust, each minute, each breath. You lean slightly as you walk, adjusting to the pressure without thinking. Ahead through the pale blur, you begin to notice movement. Not the isolated figures you have passed before, but something more organized. Dark shapes moving together, slower but more deliberate, their outlines slightly clearer against the storm. You move closer. As you approach, the shapes resolve into men bundled in heavy coats, their hats pulled low, their movements purposeful despite the conditions. One carries a lantern, its glow dim and wavering in the wind. Another grips a long pole, using it to probe the ground ahead. They are not wandering, they are searching. A well-documented fact is that during the blizzard, police officers and volunteers attempted to rescue stranded individuals, often working in small groups to navigate the streets and locate those in need. Their efforts were difficult and dangerous, limited by visibility and the sheer force of the storm. You see that difficulty now. The lantern's light barely reaches beyond a few steps, swallowed quickly by the snow. The men move cautiously, testing each step, their progress slow but steady. They speak to one another, though their voices are low, almost lost in the wind. You hear only fragments. A name, a direction, a brief exchange that suggests urgency held in check by necessity. A lesser-known detail from some reports mentions that rescuers often tied themselves together with ropes when venturing into the worst conditions, creating a physical link that prevented them from losing one another in the whiteout. It is a simple idea, but one born from experience. You look for such a rope now, but cannot see one clearly through the storm. Perhaps it is there. Perhaps not. Perhaps not. You slow as you pass them, your presence acknowledged with only a brief glance. There is no time for conversation, no space for anything beyond the task at hand. Their focus is fixed, their attention directed outward, searching for others in a landscape that offers very little clarity. You move on. The sight stays with you. The idea that even here, even now, there are those moving not for themselves but for others. It adds something to the storm, something quieter than the wind, but no less powerful. Some historians continue to discuss how effective these early rescue efforts truly were, noting that while many lives were saved, countless others remained out of reach due to the scale of the storm. It is a difficult balance, one that sits between effort and limitation. You feel that limitation now. The city is vast, the storm is everywhere. You take another step, then another, your movement steady but slow. Your legs feel heavier than before, each lift requiring more effort, each placement more deliberate. The snow resists you, pulling at your boots, shaping your path in ways you cannot fully control. Your breathing deepens. Each inhale feels colder, each exhale slower, as if your body is adjusting to a pace it did not choose. You pass a doorway where a faint light glows behind a narrow opening. For a moment you consider stopping again, stepping inside, letting the storm pass around you instead of through you. But the thought fades quickly. You're already committed to forward. The wind rises again, carrying with it a sharper edge that cuts across your face. Snow strikes harder now, more insistent, each particle a small reminder of the environment you're moving through. You lower your head further. Visibility as shrinks gain, narrowing your world to only what is directly ahead of you. Shapes appear suddenly, then vanish just as quickly, leaving you to rely more on instinct than sight. A curious observation from some personal accounts describes how people began to follow walls, fences, or any fixed structure they could find using touch rather than vision to guide themselves through the storm. It was a method born from necessity, simple but effective. You reach out slightly now, your gloved hand brushing against the side of a building as you pass. The surface is cold rough beneath your fingers. It anchors you. You keep your hand there for a few steps, letting it guide your direction, your movement. It is a small connection, but it provides a sense of certainty that the open street no longer offers. You release it after a moment, though the feeling lingers. You continue forward. The storm remains unchanged. The wind presses, the snow moves, the cold settles deeper. And yet something within you has shifted. Not relief, not comfort, but a quiet understanding. You are not the only one moving through this. There are others, searching, enduring, trying in their own ways to push back against something that cannot truly be stopped. You take another step into the white, carrying that awareness with you, even as the storm continues to surround you, unbroken and vast. You move forward, and though now the city feels thinner, stretched, as if whole parts of it have simply withdrawn from view, the storm has not weakened. If anything, it has settled into a deeper kind of control, shaping everything without needing to change its pace. The wind no longer surprises you. It simply exists, pressing, guiding, resisting. You angle your body slightly as you walk, conserving energy where you can. Your steps are slower now, each one placed carefully, your legs lifting higher to clear the uneven drifts that continue to rise and shift beneath you. Ahead, the space begins to open. You sense it before you see it. The buildings fall back slightly, their presence less immediate, their outlines fading into the pale distance. The air feels different here, less contained, more exposed. The wind moves more freely, sweeping across a wider stretch of ground. You step into it. The force hits you at once. Stronger, colder, more direct. It rushes past you in thick, fast-moving sheets, lifting from the ground and circling upward before falling again. The patterns are less predictable here, less shaped by walls and corners. It feels as though the storm has more room to express itself. You lower your head and push through. A widely accepted historical observation notes that along New York's waterfront during the blizzard, conditions were particularly severe. The combination of open space, strong winds, and freezing temperatures created an environment that was even more difficult to navigate than the streets further inland. You begin to understand why. The air carries a different scent here, faint but present. Salt. It mixes with the cold in a way that feels sharper, more biting. You can taste it slightly as you breathe, a reminder that you are near the water even if you cannot see it clearly. Through the shifting white, you begin to make out darker shapes. Structures, piers, tall posts rising from the ground, their outlines softened, but still visible enough to suggest their purpose. You move closer though. Each step feels heavier here, the wind pushing harder, the snow drifting deeper in the uneven patterns. You reach the edge of what you now recognize as the waterfront. The harbour lies somewhere beyond, though it is difficult to see. The storm has blurred the boundary between land and water, merging them into a single pale expanse that stretches outward without clear definition. You pause. For a moment, the world feels vast in a different way. Not enclosed, not narrowed, but open and uncertain. A lesser-known detail from maritime accounts describes how ships anchored in the harbour struggled against the storm, their decks coated in ice, their crews battling wind and freezing spray to maintain control. Some vessels broke free from their moorings, drifting dangerously in conditions where visibility was nearly gone. You imagine that now, the unseen movement of ships beyond the veil of snow, the creak of wood, the strain of ropes, the quiet tension of men working in conditions no less severe than your own. The wind surges again, stronger than before. It pushes you sideways, forcing you to adjust quickly to maintain your balance. Snow lashes across your face sharper, here driven with greater force across the open space. You turn slightly, presenting less of yourself to it, though the relief is minimal. You take a step and your foot sinks deeply into a drift hidden beneath the shifting surface. You pull it free with effort, your balance wavering briefly before you steady yourself. The ground here is less predictable, shaped by the wind into uneven ridges and hollows that change with each passing moment. You move more carefully now. Each step tested before weight is fully placed. Some researchers have explored whether the proximity to the harbour increased the number of fatalities in these areas, suggesting that exposure combined with disorientation near the water created particularly dangerous conditions. It is a theory that feels less abstract as you stand here feeling the force of the storm in full. You glance outward again. The horizon is gone. There is no clear line between sky and water, no distant point to anchor your vision. Everything blends into a continuous field of white and grey, shifting and moving, out clear structure. It is disorienting. You turn back toward the city. The buildings behind you are just as obscured now, their outlines softened, their presence reduced to vague shapes that offer little guidance. The sense of direction you carried before feels weaker here, stretched thin by the openness of the space. You realise quietly that this is not a place to linger. You begin to move back toward the streets. The wind resists you again, pushing from the side, then from behind, then shifting once more as if testing your balance. You lean into it, adjusting with each step, your body responding without conscious thought. A small unusual note from some accounts mentions that ice began to form not just on surfaces, but in the air itself as freezing spray from the harbour mixed with the falling snow. It created a finer, sharper layer that coated clothing and skin more quickly than ordinary snowfall. You feel that now. The cold against your face is sharper, more biting, as if the air itself carries a harder edge. You pull your scarf tighter, though it offers only partial protection. You keep moving, back toward the narrower streets where the wind, though still strong, is shaped by walls and structures, where the sense of direction, though fragile, still exists. The waterfront fades behind you, its openness replaced once again by the close shifting corridors of the city. And as you step back into that space, you carry with you the feeling of that vast, uncertain edge. A reminder that the storm does not just surround the city, it expands it, stretches it, until even the familiar feels distant and unmoored. You move back into the tighter streets, and at once the wind changes its behaviour again, curling between buildings, bending around corners, pressing and releasing in uneven pulses. It feels almost structured here, shaped by walls guided by narrow passageways. Yet it is no gentler. If anything, it feels more unpredictable. Snow rushes past in bursts, then settles briefly, then lifts again as the next current cuts through. The city feels like a maze of shifting edges, each turn offering a slightly different resistance. You follow what seems like a clear direction, though even that word has begun to lose its certainty. Your sense of where you are is still present, but the thinner now, less reliable. You rely on memory, on instinct, on the faint alignment of buildings that appear and disappear around you. Ahead you notice something unusual. A group of men gathered near a pole, their shapes partially obscured by the storm. They stand closer together than most, their movements slower, more deliberate. One of them reaches upward, his arm extended towards something barely visible through the snow. You move closer. As you approach, you see it, a telegraph line. Or what remains of it. The wire sags heavily between poles weighed down by ice and snow. It dips lower than it should, its once taut line now slack fragile. One of the men tugs at it, gently testing its tension, while another holds a lantern closer, its light flickering against the shifting white. A commonly accepted fact is that communication across the city was severely disrupted during the blizzard, as telegraph lines were brought down by the weight of ice and the force of the wind. Messages that once travelled quickly became delayed or lost entirely. You watch as the man pulls again. The wire gives slightly, then stops. It does not break, but it does not hold firmly. Firmly either. It simply hangs. A small intriguing detail recorded in some reports notes that certain telegraph operators remained at their posts for as long as possible, attempting to send messages even as lines weakened, sometimes tapping out fragments of information that never fully reached their destination. You imagine that effort now. Messages sent into uncertainty, words travelling part of the way then disappearing into silence. The men near the pole exchange a few words, their voices low, nearly lost in the wind. One shakes his head slightly. Another looks down the street as if measuring distance possibility. There is no clear solution here, only limitation. You move on. The image stays with you. The idea that even communication, something so invisible and constant, can be severed so quickly. That connection itself can fail under pressure. Some historians continue to discuss whether the breakdown of communication during the storm contributed significantly to its overall impact, suggesting that the inability to coordinate responses, share warnings, or request help amplified the danger in ways that are difficult to measure. You feel that absence now. There is no sense of a larger system guiding events, no reassurance that someone somewhere is fully aware of what is happening. Only individual experience. Individual movement. You take another step, then another. Your pace steady but slow. The snow continues to gather. The wind continues to press. The cold continues to deepen. Nothing changes. And yet everything has. You pass another intersection, though it is difficult to recognize it as such. The usual markers are gone, hidden beneath layers of snow. The space opens slightly, then closes again, shaped more by the storm than by design. You choose a direction, not because you're certain, but because you must choose. A curious note from some personal recollections describes how people began to rely on sound more than sight during the blizzard, listening for familiar echoes, distant voices, or even the direction of the wind to guide their movement. It is an adaptation born from necessity, subtle but important. You notice it now. The way your attention shifts. The sound of the wind changes as you move, reflecting differently off walls, narrowing or widening depending on the space around you. So it becomes a kind of guide, not precise but useful. You follow it, not consciously, not fully, but enough to matter. The city feels quieter now, not empty but subdued. The usual layers of sound have been stripped away, leaving only the constant rush of the storm and the occasional fleeting noise that breaks through it. A door closing, a distant shout, the soft, uneven crunch of footsteps that are not your own. Each sound feels isolated. Each one stands alone. You continue forward, though. Your body feels heavier now, your movement slower, your energy gradually diminishing. The effort of walking through the snow against the wind through the cold has begun to accumulate. You feel it in your legs, in your chest, in the quiet way your breathing has changed. You adjust your scarf again, though the motion is slower, less precise than before. Your hands are stiff, your fingers less responsive. You flex them, but the sensation is faint distant. You keep moving because you still can, because stopping still feels like something you cannot afford. The storm continues around you unchanged, unrelenting. It does not weaken. It does not pause. It simply exists, pressing into every space, every movement, every thought. And as you step forward once more, the image of that sagging wire lingers in your mind. A line once stretched tight, now hanging loose, uncertain. A connection that no longer holds. You carry that image with you as you move deeper into the storm, aware now that even the unseen threads that bind a city together can be broken. And that perhaps is what makes this moment feel so quietly vast. You continue forward though now, your steps feel slower, heavier, as if each one must pass through a layer of resistance before it settles. The storm has not changed yet, something within you has. The effort is no longer something you ignore, it is something you carry. The wind presses steadily against your side, then shifts without warning, forcing you to adjust your balance again. Snow continues to move around you, lifting, falling, reshaping the ground in ways that erase any sense of permanence. You take another step and your foot sinks deeper than before. You pull it free, but the motion takes longer. How? You pause just for a moment, not because you want to do, but because your body asks for it. You lower your head, your breath steady but slower, each inhale sharp with cold, each exhale fading quickly into the air. You close your eyes briefly, then open them again, forcing yourself forward. Ahead, something catches your attention, a shape in the snow. At first, it looks like part of the drift, an uneven rise where the wind has gathered the snow into a thicker mound. But as you draw closer, the shape resolves into something else. Something still. You slow. Your steps become more careful, more deliberate. The shape lies partially covered, its outline softened by the snow that continues to fall. A coat dark beneath the white, a hat tilted slightly to one side, the suggestion of a form that does not move. You stop a short distance away. The wind continues around you, unchanged, indifferent. A widely recorded fact is that after the blizzard, many victims were found in unexpected places, some only a short distance from safety. The storm's combination of disorientation, exhaustion, and cold created conditions where even small delays or missteps could have severe consequences. You stand there looking. The figure does not shift. The snow continues to gather. There is a quiet weight to the moment, something that does not need words to be understood. You do not step closer. You do not reach out. You simply acknowledge what is there. A small somber detail from contemporary accounts notes that some individuals were found standing upright, supported by drifts, as if they had paused only briefly before the cold overcame them. It is a detail that feels almost impossible, yet it appears again and again in descriptions of the storm's aftermath. You feel a tightening in your chest. Not fear, not exactly. Something quieter. A recognition. Some historians continue to reflect on how quickly the human body can be affected by extreme cold, especially when combined with fatigue and disorientation. The exact timeline varies, influenced by clothing movement and countless small factors, but the outcome in many cases becomes inevitable once certain thresholds are crossed. You turn your head, slightly looking away. The storm offers no space for lingering. You take a step forward, then another, moving past the still form without stopping again. The snow begins to cover your footprints, almost immediately softening the path you have taken, erasing the moment as you leave it behind. But it does not leave you. You carry it with you. The knowledge that the storm is not just something to endure, but something that takes. Quietly, gradually, without announcement. You continue, though now your pace feels even more deliberate. Your legs are heavier. Your breathing deeper. Your awareness sharper. You notice the way your steps slow slightly. The way your body adjusts, conserving energy without asking you. You lift your feet higher, place them more carefully, each movement measured. The wind rises again, though it feels less like a change and more like a continuation. It presses against you, constant, shaping your path whether you resist or not. You lean into it, because you must. A curious observation from some personal diaries describes how people began to speak less, even when they encountered others, as if words themselves required too much energy. Communication became reduced to gestures, glances, brief acknowledgements. You feel that, yes, that quiet now. The storm has taken not just sound, but the desire to create it. You pass another figure. Though this one moves slowly, carefully, their posture bent forward. For a moment you consider speaking, but the thought fades before it fully forms. There is no need, you both understand. You continue forward, though. The city around you feels even more distant now, its details reduced to fragments that appear and vanish in the shifting white. The familiar has become abstract, the known uncertain. And yet you keep going, because stopping is no longer something you consider. Because movement, however slow, however heavy, is the only thing that remains. You take another step, then another, and as you move deeper into the storm, the image of that still figure lingers quietly in your mind, not as something distant, but as something close, a reminder of what to eat. Waits if you falter, and so you do not falter. You continue one step at a time through a city that has been transformed into something both vast and intimate, where every movement matters and every pause carries weight. You keep moving, though. Now the storm feels less like something outside you and more like something you're engrossed within, a constant presence that fills every space, every breath, every thought. The wind no longer startles, the cold no longer shocks. They have become steady companions, uninvited but unavoidable. Your steps are now low and slower. Measured, each one placed with care, each movement drawn from a smaller reserve of energy than before. The snow resists you, pulling at your boots, shaping your path in ways you can no longer fully control. And then, almost without warning, something changes, not dramatically, not suddenly, but enough that you notice. The wind eases just slightly. It does not stop, it does not vanish. But its force softens for a moment, its steady pressure lifting just enough for you to feel the difference. The snow still falls, still moves, but the intensity shifts. You lift your head a little. The world around you remains blurred, but the shapes are marginally clearer now. The outlines of buildings sharpen just a fraction. The space ahead feels less compressed, less immediate. You take another step, then another. The ground beneath you remains uneven. The drift's still deep, but the constant push against your body has lessened. You feel it in your shoulders in the way you no longer have to lean quite as much to maintain your balance. It is not relief, but it is something. A widely accepted historical detail tells us that the blizzard did not maintain a single level of intensity throughout its duration. There were brief lulls, moments where the wind softened, or the snowfall seemed to lighten, offering the illusion that the worst had passed. You're inside one of those moments now. You feel it in the quiet. The storm's constant roar has diminished slightly, replaced by a softer, more distant sound. The hiss of snow remains, but it no longer dominates every sense. For the first time in what feels like hours, you can hear something else. A faint creak, a distant voice. Small, fragile sounds that break through the storm's hold. You pause just for a moment, not out of exhaustion, though that is there, but because the world has shifted enough to allow it. You stand still, your breath steady, your body adjusting to the subtle change. Around you the city begins to reappear. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Buildings emerge from the white, their shapes more defined, their presence more solid. Windows become visible again, faint glows of light flickering behind frost and snow. The street stretches a little further before dissolving into the distance. A curious detail noted in some accounts is that these temporary lulls often encouraged people to venture out again, believing the storm had weakened only to be caught off guard when conditions intensified once more. It was a dangerous misinterpretation, one that cost lives. You feel that temptation now. The idea that perhaps this is the turning point, that perhaps the storm is beginning to release its grip. You take a step forward, then another. Your pace slightly quicker, now encouraged by the change. Your legs respond with a bit more ease, the effort still present but less overwhelming. You move with renewed purpose. Some historians continue to examine whether these moments of relative calm contributed to confusion during the blizzard, suggesting that the shifting intensity made it difficult for people to judge the true nature of the storm. It was not a single predictable event, but a series of changing conditions that demanded constant adjustment. You experience that uncertainty now. The storm feels different, but it is not gone. You pass another building. This doorway partially cleared, the snow pushed aside just enough to allow entry. The path is uneven, the edge is already beginning to soften again as the snow drifts back into place. You glance inside. A figure stands near the entrance, looking out, their posture cautious, as if testing the moment. They do not step out. They simply watch, measuring the change, deciding whether it is real. You understand that hesitation. You move on. The air feels slightly less sharp, though still cold enough to remind you of its presence with every breath. Your scarf remains tight around your face, your coat pulled close, your hands still stiff but responsive. You flex your fingers again. This time the movement feels a little easier. You continue forward, your path still uncertain, but your step steadier. The city around you is no longer completely lost. It exists again, faintly partially enough to guide you in ways it could not before. But even as you move, you notice something. The snow has not stopped. It continues to fall steady and quiet. And in the distance, the wind begins to rise again. You hear it first, a low-sound building slowly threading through the spaces between buildings. It grows not suddenly, but inevitably, like something returning to its full strength. You slow. The moment of calm begins to fade. The edges of the world soften again, the visibility narrowing once more. The air thickens, the movement of snow becoming more forceful, more insistent. You feel it in your body, the shift, the return. The storm is not finished. It has only paused. A small sobering note from historical recollections describes how these brief lulls often made the storm feel longer, more exhausting as people were drawn into cycles of hope and renewed struggle. It was not just the physical habitual challenge, but the emotional weight of uncertainty that wore them down. You feel that now, the quiet lifting of expectation followed by its gentle collapse. You take another step into the rising wind, your body adjusting once more to the pressure, the resistance, the effort. The storm closes in again, and you continue forward, carrying with you the memory of that brief stillness, even as it fades behind you. You lean forward again as the wind returns with renewed certainty, pressing against you as if that brief lull had never existed at all. The storm gathers itself once more, reclaiming the space it had momentarily loosened, and you feel the difference immediately in your shoulders, your breath, your steps. The snow thickens again. It moves faster, more aggressively, sweeping across the ground in long, low waves that catch at your legs and pull at your balance. The path ahead narrows once more, shrinking back into that familiar, uncertain corridor of shifting white. You adjust without thinking. Head lowered, steps measured, breath steady. The city feels closed again. Whatever faint clarity you gained has faded, replaced by the same soft, consuming blur that has followed you for what feels like hours now. Buildings lose their edges, their outlines dissolving into pale shapes that offer little guidance. You move forward anyway. A firmly established fact is that once the storm reached its peak, entire sections of New York became nearly impassable, with snowdrifts blocking streets and halting all surface transportation. Movement was reduced to slow, laborious effort, often measured in minutes rather than distance. You are living that now. Each step is work, each movement deliberate. You lift your foot and feel the resistance immediately, the snow gripping at your boot, forcing you to pull upward before placing it down again. Your legs respond, but more slowly, the effort building in a steady, quiet burn. You pass what you think is a familiar corner, though it feels different now, altered by the storm's constant reshaping. The ground rises slightly, then dips, then rises again, as if the street itself has become uneven terrain. You adjust your stride, careful, controlled. A small unexpected detail recorded in some recollections describes how people began using objects like walking sticks, broom handles, or even broken pieces of wood to probe the ground ahead of them, testing for hidden drifts or obstacles beneath the snow. You do not have such a tool. Instead, you rely on instinct, on the cautious placement of each step, on the quiet awareness that the ground cannot be trusted. The wind shifts again, pushing from your left, then your right, then directly against you, forcing you to lean forward more sharply. It feels heavier now, as if it carries weight rather than just motion. You feel it in your chest, in the way your breathing adjusts to meet it. You pass another figure, though. This one moves with difficulty, their posture unsteady, their steps uneven. For a moment you match pace, your movements aligning briefly as you both navigate the same uncertain ground. There is a shared rhythm, unspoken. Then they drift away into the white, their shape fading quickly, leaving you alone again within your own narrow field of vision. Some historians continue to consider whether fatigue played a greater role in survival during the blizzard than is often acknowledged, suggesting that the slow cumulative exhaustion of moving through deep snow against constant wind weakened people long before the cold itself became decisive. You feel that fatigue now, not overwhelming, but present, a steady weight that settles into your legs, your shoulders, your breath. You keep moving, because stopping still feels wrong, because the idea of resting here even briefly carries a quiet sense of risk that you cannot ignore. The snow deepens again. You step into a drift that rises nearly to your calf, your foot sinking further than expected. You pull it free with effort, your balance shifting your body, compensating quickly to avoid falling. You steady yourself, then continue. The city around you feels distant now, almost abstract. The details that once defined it have been stripped away, leaving only shapes and suggestions that shift with each gust of wind. You pass a building where the snow has gathered so thickly against the door that only the upper portion remains visible. The handle is buried with the entrance effectively sealed. You imagine the people inside, listening, waiting, perhaps unaware of how much has changed beyond those walls. A curious observation from some accounts mentions that when the storm finally ended, many residents were surprised by the scale of accumulation outside, having underestimated it while sheltered indoors. The difference between inside and outside was not just physical, but perceptual. You understand that carry the outside with you. Every step, every breath. The wind rises again, though. Now it feels less like a surge and more like a continuation of what has already been established. It does not intensify so much as maintain holding its force with a steady persistence. You lean into it. Your body responds automatically, now adjusting to the pressure without conscious thought. Your movements are slower but more efficient or shaped by necessity. You take another step, then another. The rhythm continues, slow, steady, unbroken. And as you move deeper into the storm, you begin to understand something with quiet clarity. This is not about reaching a destination quickly. It is about continuing, one step at a time, no matter how slow, no matter how heavy. Because in a storm like this, progress is not measured by distance. It is measured by persistence. You keep moving, though now the rhythm of your steps feels almost separate from you, as if your body has taken over the task, entirely leaving your thoughts to drift in quieter directions. The storm continues around you unchanged, but something within the city begins to reveal itself in small, unexpected ways. Not in the wind, not in the snow, but in people. Ahead through the shifting white, you notice a faint glow, warmer and steadier than the flicker of a single lamp. It holds its place, even as the snow moves across it, a point of light that does not vanish immediately. You move toward it. As you approach, the shape of a doorway becomes visible, its entrance partially cleared, a narrow channel carved through the snow. The light spills out, softly diffused by the falling flakes, creating a small pocket of warmth in the otherwise cold expanse. You reach the threshold. The door is open. Inside, a group of people stand close together, their coats still on their faces, flushed from the heat within. Someone holds a kettle over a small flame. Another hands out cups one by one, their movements calm and deliberate. No one speaks loudly. There is no urgency in their gestures, only quiet care. A widely recognized fact is that during the blizzard, acts of kindness emerged across the city, with individuals opening their homes and businesses to strangers, offering warmth, food and shelter to those caught outside. These moments, though often small, became some of the most remembered parts of the event. You hesitate at the doorway, not out of uncertainty, but out of something softer. The realization that this space is not just shelter, but generosity. A small lesser-known detail from personal recollections describes how some families shared whatever they had without question, even when supplies were limited, trusting that others would do the same if their roles were reversed. It was not a coordinated effort, but something that emerged naturally in the face of shared hardship. You step inside. Just for a moment, the difference is immediate. The air feels thicker, warmer, carrying the scent of tea, of damp wool, drying slowly, of something human and steady. The sound of the wind fades to a distant presence, replaced by the quiet murmur of voices, the soft clink of cups, the gentle movement of people adjusting their positions. Someone offers you a cup. You take it. Your hand stiff and slow, close around it, and the warmth seeps into your fingers almost instantly. It is not enough to undo the cold entirely, but it reaches something deeper, something that had begun to fade. You bring it closer, feeling the heat against your face. For a moment, you do not think about the storm. You simply stand, a brief pause, a small island of stillness. Some historians continue to reflect on how these moments of mutual aid shaped the memory of the blizzard, suggesting that they provided a counterbalance to the hardship. A reminder that even in extreme conditions, people sought connection rather than isolation. You understand that now. The storm has taken much, but it has not taken this. You hand the cup back after a moment, nodding slightly in thanks. Words feel unnecessary here, almost too heavy for the quiet space that's been created. You step back toward the door. The wind meets you immediately as you cross the threshold, reclaiming your presence with a familiar force. The cold settles around you once more, sharp and steady, as if reminding you where you are. You turn forward again. The light fades behind you, but it does not disappear entirely. You carry it with you. You move on, though. Now your steps feel slightly steadier, your breath more controlled. The warmth lingers in your hands, in your chest, not as comfort, but as a reminder of what exists within the city even now. You pass another figure, and this time there is a brief exchange. A nod, nothing more. But it is enough. The storm continues, unchanged, unyielding, and yet the city within it feels different now. Not softer, not safer, but more connected. A curious observation from some accounts mentions that people who experienced small acts of kindness during the storm often carried those memories more vividly than the hardship itself, recalling them years later with surprising clarity. You suspect you will remember this moment. The warmth, the quiet, the simple act of being offered something without question. You take another step, then another. The rhythm continues, slow, steady, but now not entirely alone. And as you move deeper into the storm, you begin to understand that survival here is not only about endurance, it is also about these small shared moments. Brief, fragile, but powerful enough to remain even as everything else is swept away. You step back into the storm carrying that small warmth with you, though it fades quickly against the steady pressure of the cold. The wind greets you again, firm and familiar as if nothing has changed. And in many ways nothing has. Yet something has, not in the storm, but in how the city will remember it. You move forward, your steps slow but steady, the rhythm of effort now, something your body has fully accepted. The snow continues to gather, the drifts rising higher, the streets narrowing further. Movement feels less like travel and more like persistence. A clearly established historical fact that the Great Blizzard of 1888 became a turning point for New York's infrastructure, leading directly to major changes, such as the burying of telegraph and power lines underground and the eventual development of the subway system. The storm exposed vulnerabilities that could no longer be ignored. You are walking through those vulnerabilities now, through streets where wires sag and fail, where transportation halts, where communication breaks. The storm has revealed everything that once worked quietly in the background. Now nothing is hidden. You pass another pole, its wires coated thickly with ice hanging lower than they should. Snow has gathered along them, forming uneven shapes that sway slightly with the wind. They look fragile, uncertain, as if they could give way at any moment. You step around it carefully. The city feels less like a system now and more like a collection of parts, each struggling on its own. A small but fascinating detail noted in historical records is that after the blizzard, city planners began seriously considering underground solutions not just for transportation but for utilities as well. Recognizing that exposure to the elements had become a liability, you imagine that future now. Tunnels beneath the streets, trains moving unseen below the snow, wires protected from wind and ice. It feels distant from where you stand, but it begins here. Some scholars still debate whether the blizzard alone was enough to drive these changes, or whether it simply accelerated ideas that were already forming. Progress is rarely caused by a single event. More often it is pushed forward by moments that make inaction impossible. This feels like one of those moments. Even now, even here, you continue forward, your path still uncertain, your movement still slow. The storm does not ease. It holds its place, pressing into every surface, every structure, every person who remains within it. You pass another building where the snow has risen nearly to the windowsill, the lower portion of the structure hidden entirely. The door is barely visible, its outline suggested more than seen. You imagine it later, after the storm, people digging, clearing paths, revealing what has been buried. A curious observation from some accounts describes how once the blizzard ended, entire streets had to be excavated with workers carving narrow corridors through deep snow just to allow movement again. It was not a quick process. It took days, sometimes longer. You feel the scale of that now. The accumulation is not just something you move through. It is something that will remain, something that will need to be undone. You take another step, then another, your pace steady but slow. The effort continues unchanged, your body working within its limits, your mind focused on the simple act of continuing. The wind rises again though. Now it feels almost familiar, a constant force rather than a sudden threat. You lean into it without hesitation, your posture adjusting automatically. You have learned its patterns, at least enough to move within them. You pass another figure. Though this one stands near a wall, their posture more stable, their presence less strained. They appear to be waiting, perhaps for a moment of change, perhaps for someone else. You nod as you pass. They nod in return. A brief exchange, but it carries weight. The storm has stripped away many things, but not recognition. Not entirely. You continue on, the city around you still obscured, still shifting, still uncertain. And yet beneath that uncertainty, something else is forming. An understanding that this moment, as difficult as it is, will not simply pass unnoticed. It will be remembered, studied, built upon. You are moving through something that will reshape the city long after the snow has melted. You take another step, then another. The rhythm continues. Slow, steady, enduring. And as you move forward through the storm, you carry with you not just the weight of the present, but the quiet sense that what you're experiencing will echo far beyond this night. You continue forward, though now the storm feels less like a moment in time and more like something that will linger long after it has passed. The wind presses against you steady and familiar while the snow continues its quiet, relentless work covering, shaping, softening everything it touches. Your steps are slower, measured, careful, each one placed with intention, each movement drawn from a body that has been working without rest for longer than it expected. And yet you continue, because you can, because you must. The city around you feels distant now, not just in space but in time. The familiar rhythm of life that filled these streets only hours ago feels like something from another day, another version of the same place. You pass a building, its outline barely visible through the snow, and for a moment you imagine what it will look like when the storm is over. The drifts piled high against its walls, the windows cleared slowly one by one. The door finally opened after being pressed shut by the weight outside. A well-established fact is that the Great Blizzard of 1888 remained in public memory as one of the most severe storms in American history, not only because of its scale, but because of how deeply it affected daily life in a rapidly growing city. You begin to understand why. This is not just weather, it is disruption. It is transformation. You take another step, your foot sinking, then rising again with effort. The rhythm continues, though now it feels quieter, less urgent, as if your body has accepted the pace it must maintain. The wind softens slightly, though not enough to change the conditions. It feels more like a steady presence than a force you must resist. You move with it. A small, almost overlooked detail from later recollections is that many survivors describe the silence after the storm as more striking than the storm itself. The absence of movement, of sound, of normal life created a stillness that felt unfamiliar, even unsettling. You can almost sense that silence already. It waits beneath the storm. You pass another intersection, though it is little more than a widening of space suggested by the shapes around you. The usual markers are gone, hidden beneath layers of snow that erase the lines people rely on. You choose a direction, not because you are certain, but because movement itself has become the goal. Some historians continue to reflect on how memory shapes events like this, suggesting that over time stories of the blizzard grew not in exaggeration but in meaning. Each person carried their own version, their own experience, and together they formed something larger than any single account. You feel that now, even as you move through it. You are part of something that will be told again and again, shaped by voices, by recollection, by the quiet need to make sense of what happened. You take another step, then another. The storm continues unchanged, but your perception of it shifts. It no longer feels endless. It feels significant. A curious observation from some accounts mentions that people who lived through the blizzard often mark time differently afterward, remembering life as before the storm and after it, as if it had divided their experience into two distinct parts. You begin to understand that division. This moment will not fade easily. It will remain. You pass another figure, though. This one moves with more certainty than most, their steps steady, their posture upright despite the conditions. There is something different in their movement, something that suggests familiarity, resilience, perhaps even experience. You watch them for a moment, then they fade into the white. The city continues to exist around you, though it feels quieter now, as if it has drawn inward, conserving itself, waiting for the storm to pass. You continue forward, your steps steady, your breath controlled, your focus narrowed to the simple act of moving through the space ahead of you. The wind shifts again, though it feels less important now. You have adapted to it. You have learned to move within a set, and as you take another step, you begin to sense something deeper than the storm itself, a quiet awareness that what you are experiencing is not just hardship, it is history. You're walking through a moment that will be remembered, studied, retold, not because it was easy, but because it changed things. You continue, one step, then another, carrying that awareness with you as the storm surrounds you, steady and vast, while the city beneath it waits for what comes next. You keep moving though, now the storm feels quieter in a way that is difficult to explain. Not weaker, not gone, but settled into itself as if it has said everything it intends to say. Your steps continue, slow, measured, but no longer uncertain. You have learned the rhythm of this place, the resistance of the snow, the steady pressure of the wind, the quiet demands of the cold. Your body moves within it now, not comfortably, but with understanding. The city around you remains blurred, softened by layers of white, yet it feels less distant than before. You recognize shapes again, not clearly, but enough to anchor your movement. A corner, a doorway, the faint suggestion of a street you have known. You take another step, then another, and gradually, almost without noticing, the effort begins to change. Not because the storm has ended, but because you've endured it long enough to see beyond its peak. A firmly grounded historical fact is that the Great Blizzard of 1888 lasted for several days, but its most intense period eventually passed, leaving behind a city buried under immense drifts of snow, its daily life brought to a complete halt. You are moving into that aftermath now. The wind softens slightly, not disappearing, but easing enough that it no longer dominates every movement. The snow continues to fall, but more gently, its patterns less aggressive, less forceful. You lift your head a little higher. The world begins to open, just slightly. The outlines of buildings become clearer, their edges more defined, their presence more solid. Windows glow faintly again, steady points of light that no longer vanish immediately behind the moving snow. You see a door ahead, partially cleared. You move toward it. As you approach, it opens and a figure steps out, pausing just beyond the threshold. They look around slowly, taking in the changed world, their posture cautious but curious. You pass them without speaking, but there is a shared understanding. The storm has shifted. It has not ended, but it has loosened its grip. A small reflective detail from historical recollections describes how, after the storm, people often stepped outside in silence, observing the transformed city with a kind of quiet disbelief. The familiar had become unfamiliar, the ordinary reshaped into something vast and still. You feel that now, even as you continue to move. The snow beneath your feet is deep uneven, but no longer shifting as quickly. Your steps, though, still heavy, feel more certain. The ground holds its shape more consistently, offering a sense of stability that was absent before. You take another step, then another. The rhythm remains, but the effort feels different. Less urgent, more sustainable. Some scholars still explore how people process the aftermath of such a storm, suggesting that the experience was not only physical, but deeply psychological. The sudden stillness, the altered landscape, the awareness of what had been endured, created a space for reflection that was as powerful as the storm itself. You begin to feel that reflection now. The wind brushes against you, softer than before, carrying snow that falls more than it flies. The air still holds its cold, but it feels less aggressive, less insistent. You glance upward. For the first time, the sky feels present again, not as a featureless expanse, but as something above you, separate from the ground, separate from the path ahead. You breathe in slowly. The air is still cold, but it feels clearer. You continue forward, though. Now your steps feel less like effort and more like continuation. The storm has not taken everything. It has not stopped you entirely. It has only changed how you move. A curious observation from later accounts notes that after the blizzard, people often spoke in softer tones, as if the experience had quieted something within them, leaving behind a gentler awareness of the world around them. You understand that now? The city feels quieter, not empty, but subdued. You pass another building, its doorway cleared just enough to allow entry, its windows glowing softly. Inside, you imagine the same scenes you have glimpsed before. Warmth, light, people gathered close. You do not stop. Not this time. You keep moving, because now movement feels different. Not urgent, not desperate, but steady. You take another step, then another. And as you do, the storm continues to fade, not all at once, but gradually, like a long breath, finally released. You move through the final stretch of it, carrying with you everything you have felt, everything you have seen. The cold, the silence, the effort, the quiet moments of warmth, the glimpses of others moving through the same space. And slowly the city begins to return. Not as it was, but as something changed, something that has endured. You continue forward your steps, steady, your breath calm, your path no longer uncertain. And as the storm settles into memory behind you, the world around you softens the edges, easing the movement, slowing. You walk on. Now the night draws gently inward, and the city, once loud and restless, settles into a deep, quiet stillness. The snow lies thick across every surface, softening sound, softening light, softening even the sharp edges of memory. You feel it in the way your steps slow, in the way your breathing evens, in the way the world seems to hold itself in a calmer rhythm. There is no urgency now, only quiet. You imagine the streets resting beneath their white cover, the buildings standing patient and still, the people inside them wrapped in warmth, in quiet conversations, in the simple comfort of having endured. The storm which once filled every space now feels distant, not gone, but gentle, like a story that has already been told. You let that feeling settle. You let the weight of the day drift away, carried off like the last traces of wind slipping between the buildings. The cold fades from your awareness, replaced by a soft, steady calm that spreads through your body, through your thoughts. Everything's slow. Everything softens. And as the city rests beneath its quiet blanket of snow, you do the same, allowing yourself to drift into that stillness, into that into that gentle space where nothing more is required. Sweet dreams.